Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Christian Church of Austin, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're invited and welcome. This sermon from Sunday, September 27th, 2015, is an interactive, intergenerational sharing of the story of Queen Esther, found in the book of the Hebrew Bible bearing her name. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministries at United Christian Church, simply head over to our website, www.uccaustin.org. Thank you.
So this morning, we are going to share in the story of Esther. And it's a real challenge because Esther only comes up once or twice in the course of the lectionary that guides our Bible reading for preaching. And really, it's one story. It would be very hard to preach a sermon just on chapter 2 of Esther, or a few verses here or there. But it's also a challenge to share the entire story, the whole Megillah. Anybody ever heard that term before? It's kind of an old-fashioned term. You say that somebody tells you the whole story, they say the whole Megillah. That's where this term comes from. Megillah is actually the Hebrew name for the book of Esther. And the reason that phrase came about is that at the Hebrew festival, at the Jewish festival that celebrates the story of Esther, which is called Purim, you read the whole Megillah. And if you ever get a chance to go to a Purim celebration, and I hope you do, it's very fun, it's very raucous, it's kind of like Halloween for Jews in some ways. There are lots of costumes and wonderful food, special food for the season, and you read the story, and people are trained to read the story very, very fast, because it's a long story, and they want to get through the whole Megillah. So today we're going to share that story in a slightly abbreviated fashion, but also in an interactive way that I hope will help us get into the story a little bit. So I'm going to need 4 people who are brave enough to come forward and help in the telling of this story. So are there 4 volunteers? Come on, Bill, come on up. Ian? Any brave women among us? Maddie? And come on, Raleigh, come on up. So if you guys will line up 1, 2, 3, 4 across the front, up on the step. There we go. So these are for 4 of the 5 main characters in our story. And the way we'll do this is that every time that particular character is mentioned, we have a gesture and a sound that go with it, okay? So the very first one is King Xerxes, and Raleigh will be King Xerxes, okay? King Xerxes, his name in Persian, he was the king of the Persian Empire, 137 provinces that stretch from India to Ethiopia in the 6th century before Christ. And his name in Persian was Ahasuerus, but he's also called Xerxes. And since Ahasuerus is really hard to say, we're going to call him Xerxes. So every time that name comes up, King Xerxes is mentioned, we're going to do this. First of all, can you make a trumpet sound like this? And we're going to put a crown on our head. So every time Xerxes is mentioned, we go, and Raleigh's going to be the Xerxes leader up front. So every time that Xerxes is mentioned, Raleigh's going to do that. So the second character is Vashti, and she is King Xerxes' queen of the entire Persian Empire, and she is known for her beauty, her strong will, and her fine collection of jewelry. So every time the name Vashti is mentioned, we'll all go like this, ooh. There we go, all right? So Vashti, ooh, all right. Now, Mordecai is one of the heroes of this story, and you're going to be Mordecai. Mordecai is a good and upright man, a Jew living in Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire. So every time that Mordecai, he is a down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth sort of guy. So every time Mordecai's name gets mentioned, we do this. That's right. Exactly, he's got his suspenders right there, right? So every time Mordecai's name is mentioned, we go, that's right. All right. And then the villain of our piece is Haman. Exactly. How did you know? Every time Haman's name gets mentioned, we go, Now, if we were at a Jewish Purim celebration, we'd actually all have noisemakers, so that when the name of Haman gets mentioned, everybody does the noisemakers to drown out the name of Haman, so you can't even hear it. Yes, exactly. Now, all of us get to play the role of the heroine of the piece, who is Esther. Esther is a beautiful Jewish girl. She's been orphaned, but is being raised in the city of Susa by her cousin, Mordecai. That's right. And so every time we hear the name of Esther, we go, "Aww." All right? And everybody can do that. So we have our leaders. We have King Xerxes. We have the lovely Vashti. Oh. We have Mordecai. That's right. And Haman. And of course, Queen Esther. Oh. All right, so we tell our story. Once upon a time, did you know that was biblical? Once upon a time, Xerxes, the king of all Persia, stretching to encompass the entire known world, decided to throw a party to celebrate the utter magnificence of himself. And he invited all of the important people, all of the generals and nobles and governors, all of the important men of the empire to travel to the central city, to the capital city of Susa, for a party that lasted 180 days, if you can imagine. And once that was over, he decided to throw another party, a smaller party, only 7 days, for the citizens of Susa, his capital city, as a thank you for inconveniencing them with his 6 months of merrymaking. So on the 7th day, when he was good and full and a little bit drunk, Xerxes called for his queen, Vashti, who had long since retired from all of this foolishness, long since barricaded herself in her own chambers, called for her to come and put on all of her royal jewels and not much else, to come and say hello to the boys downstairs. Well, Vashti was a little upset, and against all advice, sent a few choice words to refuse the king's request. Well, Xerxes exploded. Oh, he was so angry, marching up and down, turning over tables, so angry. And on the advice of his advisors, he took Vashti and ripped the crown from her head and sent her away into exile, lest her example of independent thinking catch on among the women of the empire. Well, after a while, the king began to miss his queen, miss having a woman's touch around the palace. And so mighty Xerxes began to mope around the palace. Oh, and he began to make life terrible for all his servants. He was constantly getting in the way, asking if he could help, and of course he couldn't. He had no idea. He was a king. He began to make life so difficult that finally his advisors got together and they suggested that Xerxes hold sort of a reality contest, auditions for a new queen. And so he sent out invitations throughout the empire that all the very most beautiful young women should come to the palace for a chance to win a date with the king. Now, living in Susa, there was a certain man, a Jewish man, an upright and faithful man named Mordecai. That's right. He lived there in Susa in the very shadow of the palace. His family and his people had been brought to Susa as captives in the days of the Jewish exile, until his grandfather and grandmother and their generation had been freed by Xerxes' grandfather when he had overthrown the Assyrians and liberated the empire and the Jews. So Mordecai, that's right, Mordecai's family had stayed on in Susa and made a life for themselves there. But the apple of his eye was his young cousin, Hadassah, orphaned at birth, whom he raised as his very own daughter. So Hadassah, or Esther, as she was known outside her Jewish home among the Persians, was beautiful, stunning, with a musical laugh and dark, smiling eyes and a modest heart. Well, it came as no surprise to anyone when she was picked to go up to the palace. "Go on," said Mordecai. "That's right. Go on and show them what you got, Mamala. I've told you, you're prettier and smarter than any of those other girls. You deserve to be queen. But just to be on the safe side, Bobby, you might not go mentioning so much that you're Jewish. It's not that we're ashamed, but, well, you know." He didn't have to say any more. Esther, did know. 3 generations is not a very long time when your whole people have been carried off to a foreign country as the spoils of war. She would keep quiet as she went up to the palace. Well, life in the harem with all the other contestants from all over the empire was so boring for Esther. So boring. Up every day at the crack of noon, the very best food to eat waited on hand and foot, and always more primping and posing and pillows and perfume. And then the selection process began. Each night, a new girl would be brought before the king. And each morning the door would open and another girl would be sent packing back home, nary a crown in sight. But you see, Esther wasn't just pretty. She was pretty smart. And she made friends with all the palace servants and then with the eunuchs who tended the harem, and asked them for all sorts of questions about the king and the former queen and all the little things she used to do for him that he liked so well. So when her turn came to meet King Xerxes, Esther was ready. The king never knew what hit him. And next morning, when that door opened, Esther poked her head out into the hall, crowned with gold and silver and precious jewels, and she asked for a couple of coffees, light and sweet, and a Danish for 2, before she shut the door once more. And the king and his new queen missed lunch and dinner and breakfast the next day. Meanwhile, out in the city, Mordecai, that's right, kept careful watch on his cousin from a distance. Every day he sat at the gate of the palace to hear news of her and her new life with this Goyish king. But sitting there, Mordecai, that's right, heard a great many other things too. Bits and pieces of gossip from all over the empire. All the great people toing and froing from the palace tended to overlook the odd man in the funny foreign clothes. And so it was that one day Mordecai, that's right, overheard 2 of the guards at the gate planning to assassinate the king. Well, being upright and faithful, he knew he had to do something. This was practically his new son-in-law they were planning to kill. So Mordecai, that's right, got word to Esther, who told Xerxes, who foiled the plot and had the traitors hanged. It was in all the papers. Well, enter the villain. Haman was a proud and ambitious man and a schemer. He was working his way up through the ranks of the imperial bureaucracy, and you know what they say, scum always floats to the top of the pond. And eventually Haman became prime minister. By order of the king, everyone, every citizen of the empire was supposed to bow before him. And you know what? Haman loved this. He used to go out on little errands around town for things that he didn't even need, just to see the people bow and scrape before him. And when he passed through the palace gates, there sat Mordecai. That's right. And you know what? Mordecai, that's right, refused to bow to him. The gall. As a Jew, Mordecai, that's right, would only bow before Adonai, the Holy One, the God of Israel. Well, this made Haman so angry. Flames on the side of his head, so angry. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got, until revenge on the one man himself was not going to be enough. He would wipe out that mongrel dog and his entire species with him. And so Haman picked a day to do it. The 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And on that day, all the Jews would pay for this insult. So Haman went in to see the king and set his evil scheme in motion. He told Xerxes about a certain foreign people, undocumented immigrants no less, living in their midst, spies no doubt for a foreign empire, who refused to obey his commands and show him the respect he deserved. Oh, my king, if you thought Vashti was dangerous, well. And so Haman outlined a plan to deal with this threat to national security. Oh, and by the way, O king, I would be glad to make a contribution of 10,000 talents of silver into the king's coffers out of my own pocket and the goodness of my heart to fund this special effort of such import to the empire. And so Xerxes agreed. And he called all of his royal secretaries and dictated a memo to be sent out across every corner of the empire to all 137 provinces from India to Ethiopia, giving the people of the Persian Empire permission to rise up and kill the Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And Haman went out laughing to himself. And he had a set of gallows built 50 feet high just to hang Mordecai. That's right. Well, it wasn't long before Mordecai, that's right, learned of the plot, sitting there in the gate with all the couriers being dispatched. And he and the entire Jewish community mourned aloud and wept at their fate. They cried out to God and put on sackcloth and ashes. And in addition to praying, they also made a plan of their own. Whereas Haman's plot depended on the evil of an entire empire, Mordecai, that's right, his plan pinned his hopes on the goodness of just one person, one young woman, on Esther. So Mordecai, that's right, sent word of the evil scheme to her in the harem and begged her to use her influence to change the king's mind. But Esther, was terrified. At first she tried to refuse. She tried to find some excuse. But really it was because the penalty for coming into the inner court of the king's presence without an invitation was death. And it had been more than 30 days since the king had sent for her. To which Mordecai, that's right, replied, I know, Bubala, but remember who you are. If you don't do this, well, God may raise up help for our people from another quarter, but you and I won't escape, even here in the palace. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal privilege for just such a time as this. Our people will fast and pray for you, that God may give you the courage you need. 3 days later, as the day of doom approached, Esther made up her mind, and her face and her hair And she walked right into the inner court of the king's presence, where he was talking shop with who? But Haman. Well, when Xerxes saw her, he was so moved by her beauty and intrigued by her courage that he motioned for her to come closer. "What is it, my queen, my Esther?" "What is your request? I would give you up to half my kingdom if you were to ask it, looking like that." Well, her voice trembled as she spoke. "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases you, O king, spare my life and the life of my people, for you have been tricked into destroying the Jews, and I also am a Jew." Well, King Xerxes rose from his throne in his wrath. Who is he? Where is this person who has dared to do this thing? And with one slender finger, Esther pointed across the room at the prime minister, who was cowering in a corner. A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. So for love of Queen Esther, King Xerxes had Haman hanged on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. That's right, 50 feet high. And following his lead, when the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, arrived, Jews across the empire rose up to defend themselves against their enemies. And the entire Jewish people survived because of the courage of just one woman, beautiful, bright, brave Queen Esther. Friends, as we contemplate the world around us and the many evils that prevail, perhaps we ought to ask the very same question that Mordecai, that's right, asked Esther. Who knows? But perhaps we too have come to such privilege as we enjoy in the world for just such a time as this. And so, friends, if you have shared in the Word of God this morning, remember to give all honor and glory to our one God, Creator, Christ, and Holy Spirit. Amen. And let's give a round of applause to our actors up here.